Hey folks, before we begin today's show, I want to give a quick shout out to Idle Courses Academy. If you're looking to transition into the corporate instructional design space, you need the right guidance to do so. Dr. Sargent and her team have done an incredible job with focusing on what's important to be a corporate instructional designer, like storyboarding, ID models and theories, authoring tools, project management tactics, and more. They even cover how to make your resume and portfolio stand out from the crowd and have an impressive completion rate, with their students working at organizations like Google, Salesforce, GM, Uber, Walmart, and Amazon. Also, you won't be going through this learning journey alone. You'll be studying alongside other aspiring instructional designers, as well as working with experienced mentors and coaches. And as an added bonus, you'll get a free copy of my ebook, What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer. So check out the industry-recognized program that's showing up in job descriptions as preferred training and education by going to idlecourses.com/academy. Use the promo code Luke to save you $88 off your enrollment. And now, let's start the show. Hello, my learning nerds, and welcome on in to another episode of the podcast. My name is Dr. Luke Hobson. I'm a senior instructional designer and program manager. I'm also an author, blogger, podcaster, and instructor. My passion and my purpose is to help you make this transition over into the instructional design space, as well as helping you to learn more about how to make the online learning experience meaningful and engaging and relevant for your students and for your learners. And you can find all my information over at drlukehobson.com. And today's episode is a solo episode, folks. You are just getting me. I am going to be reading for you my new blog post that came out over on the website that I just mentioned at drlukehobson.com. And this blog is titled, What I've Learned from Designing and Teaching Online Courses for Adults. I was talking more and more with some folks the other day about andragogy, and I was wanting to put together all of my thoughts around just everything about my past experiences, my learnings, what I've gone through, what I've seen work well, what hasn't been so great, and I put them all together inside of this blog/podcast episode for you. So let's dive on in, shall we? From 2006 to 2007, I enrolled in online courses for the first time. It reminded me of the Wild West. There didn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for why I was doing particular assignments. There was no consistency or unity throughout the courses. They weren't even styled correctly, with some of my courses in Blackboard being colored by pine tree green and neon pink. And no, unfortunately, I'm not joking. One of my courses actually had that type of a color style, if you will, not a style. It was pain. Anyway, beyond the chaos of the appearance, every course format, it was predictable. I had to purchase a physical textbook, read a few chapters a week, submit a discussion post, and then turn in an essay. I repeated these steps for 10 weeks in a row and then moved on to the next course. What this really meant, though, is that I was told to read something that I didn't know the purpose behind it. I was forced into a conversation with my fellow peers where everyone just said, I agree or I disagree. And then I had to write a 500-word essay on what I quote-unquote learned. Was I actually learning, though? I would get straight A's by following the directions, lightly absorbing the content, and then was able to repeat the information back. It was a baffling feeling to be proud of my accomplishments, yet feel like I just wasted thousands of dollars. The root cause of my issues was with how the courses were taught and designed. There isn't necessarily a right way versus wrong way of designing online courses. You're a listener of this podcast, so you know, but I like talking about instructional design almost as a form of art and creativity. But there certainly are common mistakes to avoid and best practices to follow to make the learning process meaningful. You can't simply take how a course is taught in person and then copy the exact same thing online. It just does not work in the same manner. Far more thought has to be put into the design process and, of course, how someone is then going to teach the content. Now, do I blame these instructors for the way the courses were designed and taught? No. I don't know of any single person who had an incredible jaw-dropping experience in the online space back in the early 2000s. It just wasn't a thing. How to effectively teach and design, that information wasn't readily available like it is today, and hiring instructional designers wasn't common practice yet. Unfortunately, some institutions still design and teach online courses in the same manner from my 2006 experience, and that really needs to change. Hopefully this blog post and podcast episode, they move that needle in the right direction. Now, funny enough, my learning experiences, I guess I'll call them that from what I previously just mentioned, well, this all led me to failing out of high school. When you combine that with the early on learning days, all of this really has lit a fire inside of me to try to make the online learning space a better place for adults. There seems to be this notion that since we are designing for adults, we don't have to put in as much care and attention to detail. They're adults after all, so they can just figure it out, right? Well, not so much. I'd argue that because these students and learners are adults, we have to go above and beyond. Adults already have a million other commitments, and now their education is about to get put on their already overflowing plates. The best way I can think of for trying to make a difference is by sharing what I've experienced with learning nerds like yourself. These tips from teaching 20 plus courses online, designing online programs at MIT, writing a book about making instructional design your career, and teaching my own instructional design courses over on EduFlow. So here is a brain dump of all the things I've learned about designing and teaching online courses for adults. The first step is to create a welcoming environment. Let's pretend that you are starting a new job and it's your first day. What do you think your day is going to look like? You'll probably have some kind of job orientation. You'll go through trainings, listen to speakers, shadow a veteran employee, talk to new coworkers, and learn about the culture and the benefits and so on and so forth. I think of starting an online class like a new job. There has to be an orientation for obviously A, learning about the platform and expectations for everything with the assignments, but more importantly is B, who you are in the classroom with. In a normal face-to-face classroom, the instructor will typically introduce themselves and have people go around the room to do the same thing. This can be replicated in the online learning space in a few different ways. It depends upon the comfortability of the instructor and the resources that the institution has to offer, but I do this through either GatherTown or Zoom. In GatherTown, and I know you've heard me talk about GatherTown quite a bit, but in GatherTown, you can create your own virtual space for students to connect with one another. The beauty of this space is that GatherTown becomes the conversation starter, and it instantly breaks the ice. I mean, how many times have you used a virtual video platform before that looks like The Legend of Zelda? I'm going to guess not very much. And because of that, it's a fun way to overcome the Zoom fatigue that many adults have faced during the pandemic. However, I can't speak entirely ill of Zoom since my favorite orientation activity is through speed dating. Now, William Cranier, my buddy over from EduFlow, introduced me to this where every 5 minutes, 2 students are placed into breakout rooms, and it keeps on cycling until the time runs out. After doing this, I could see the chemistry between the students, and it created far more participation in the future sessions now that everyone had a chance to talk with one another. And as an instructor, I was also there as well. I was one of the participants in the breakout rooms, and for me, that was always so much fun because not only do the students get to connect with one another, but then also myself as the instructor was there, and it always was kind of like a fun surprise you could see on someone's face of like, oh, you're doing this too. And it's like, well, yeah, this is about us. It's not just about everyone going through this as students. Like, I want to make sure I'm doing this with you at the same time. And of course, for those who can't attend the sessions, they can be recorded, and then we can make them into some form of an activity like a watch party, and then have everyone go in and discuss what they learned during that event. My next tip is to explain the why. If I ask someone to perform a task, I'm going to explain the purpose behind the ask. Any leadership course will mention how transparency is key to making decisions. Sharing the details and asking for feedback about a decision builds trust among employees. It also builds inclusivity because I want others to feel a part of a decision and that they have ownership with how decisions are made. The online space can be done in the same way. When I design online programs, I use a method known as backward design. To extremely simplify backward design, it means starting with the end goals in mind. What problem are we trying to solve? What skills should the learners be developing and working towards? From there, we can design assessments, activities, and content to focus on achieving our main outcomes. The program should be constructed in a way for students to visibly see their progress and growth with every step they take towards being able to achieve the desired results. This can be done with every ask that we have for students. It's not effective to simply say, read chapters 1 through 5 and expect our learners to hyper-focus on every single word. It's far more effective to say, read this case study on leadership and specifically think about the transparency issue that was presented to you. How did the character's decision directly impact the team? Can you think of a time that you've experienced a leader making a group decision without considering the feedback of employees? By not mentioning the purpose, I feel like we are just missing the point. And in the blog, I linked to a YouTube video over from The Simpsons from way back in the day. I actually love The Simpsons. I think I've seen every single episode. But as I was writing this blog post, it actually reminded me of one scene in particular. And if you don't know of The Simpsons, I'll paint the picture for you. There is a reverend named Reverend Lovejoy who is doing types of consulting, if you will, for his parishioners as they are calling in with their problems. And one of the people who calls in is Principal Skinner. And he describes about how him and his mother got into an argument, and he's asking Reverend Lovejoy, what should he do? And Reverend Lovejoy just says, just read the Bible. And Principal Skinner says, well, is there any chapter I should read in particular? And he's like, nah, it's all good. Just read the whole thing. He's like, oh, all right, thanks. And that's what I feel like we're doing when we're just trying to give people this wide range as far as we're saying to read all of these chapters. Don't focus on a certain thing. Don't focus on trying to be able to solve a problem as you are going through this. Don't focus on using anything as far as your critical thinking skills or really just anything with meta thinking about this all. Just read the whole thing. And by the end, miraculously, you will arrive to some form of conclusion. The next tip is to factor in experiences. As a designer, I absolutely love this challenge. How do you design a course for everyone, but everyone comes in with different levels of prior knowledge? This one takes a few tries to get right, but once you do, it's awesome to see this fully develop. To give you an example, I have a course about collaborating and building relationships with subject matter experts, or as we call them in the field, SMEs. In my opinion, this is where new designers struggle the most because no one teaches you how to use influence to get buy-in for an idea. However, as an instructional designer, it is crucial for me to get myself and the SME on the same page, and sometimes that takes a bit of convincing. So, how do you wield influence? And that's what that course is all about. When I designed the course, I was thinking about my target audience and who was going to be the students for this course. And I came down to essentially, there's really just two different types of people who I think are going to be taking this. And that is going to be current instructional designers who want to hone their craft and get better at their skill. But also, there's a lot of folks trying to transition over into this field right now. They just learned about instructional design during the pandemic, and they're trying to become first-time new instructional designers. So, how do I design for people with such varying levels of different experiences? The solution was to provide options for the assignments and the activities. You may not be an instructional designer yet, but I bet you have worked with a colleague or a supervisor or a fellow peer, and you had to go through challenging times together. What did you do? What worked? What could be improved upon for the next time? These varying levels of experience also make for incredible conversations in the discussion boards on Zoom or in person, whatever you're doing nowadays. Those who have more experience as designers, they're encouraged to share their thoughts around the topics. Those that are brand new who have a question, well, they are openly encouraged to ask questions to their fellow peers so that way they can chime in and they can answer them. When the conversation becomes organic and revolves around helping one another, it's an incredible and a beautiful thing. The next tip is to focus on the process. If you want adults to use critical thinking skills, decision-making skills, and emotional intelligence, you can't just have right or wrong answers. You want to see the student's thought process and how they arrived at their decision. What factors did they consider before making their answers? Who did they turn to for advice? What steps did they take to actively research the problem? I need them to become cognizant of their own thought process, and by asking them to document how they use logic to arrive at a decision, and that is quite a telling tale. For instance, I designed a course at the height of the pandemic all about innovation and creating new products and services. I was trying to create a problem but didn't have a correct answer, and this was quite challenging to do. I noticed that more and more places were going fully remote, and all of the live events that we were used to, well, they were being canceled for the foreseeable future. Then the idea hit me. How are businesses surviving that rely on live events? What exactly are they going to do? As the course centered around innovation, it was the perfect topic to make students think about how to pivot business models. What new innovative idea are you going to use? If you worked for a company that's always relied on selling products at live events, how can you shift this model to a different one without causing catastrophic confusion? It was fascinating to see the ideas that learners came up with for using new subscription-based models, membership exclusives, ticket-based private webinars, and more. The most interesting thing about all of this is that while the students were completing the assignments, they could then turn to the real world as a gigantic case study. Every business around them was trying to shift to a new business model, and every day, a new organization was announcing a new strategy. I never imagined buying an exclusive ticket to a movie premiere on YouTube, but hey, that happened. And for students, this real-time critical thinking ability was what they needed at that point in time. The next tip is to be vulnerable. We've all had that one professor who was delusional. They thought of themselves as the greatest instructor of all time, and they didn't need to hear student feedback because their courses are perfect. Well, this holier-than-thou complex has got to go. We are human beings. We aren't perfect. We make mistakes. By admitting this to students, they don't view you as being inferior or a bad teacher. In my experience, they appreciate the honesty. I've had classes before where a student will ask me a fantastic question and I don't have an answer. Rather than trying to spitball and make something up on the spot, I'll say something like, "That's a great question and no one has ever asked me that before. Let me do some research and I'll reach back out to you soon." I have also taken the question and I have flipped it back to other students to ask them to chime in with their thoughts. As I've mentioned earlier, adults have plenty of experience, and I don't doubt their abilities to contribute to the conversation when I can't. Speaking of being a human being and factoring in adults' experiences, you should constantly be listening to student feedback. This can come from course evaluations, surveys, fireside chats, interviews, whatever method you prefer is fine with me. It doesn't matter how many times that I run a course, I always ask for feedback, and I do my best to incorporate those ideas into the next run of the course. If you work in education or L&D, I'm sure you consider yourself a lifelong learner. Learning can simply come from our audience and being receptive to new ideas. Not all of them are feasible, and some might contradict one another, which is kind of funny, but I guarantee that you'll hear one idea and be like, Why didn't I ever think of this before? This is such a good idea. And it happens every single time. Our students learn from us, but we learn just as much from them. The next tip is to embrace the community aspect. Years ago, one of my professional goals at work was to network with more instructional designers. I found myself wanting to connect with other professionals and to learn from them. I realized that I was living on my own island. I only knew of like 4 designers. So I was like, wait a minute, there has to be more people. What are they doing in their designs to make the learning experience more engaging? What tips could they share with me to have a more lasting impact on my students? And it turns out I wasn't alone. If you've been monitoring anything on Facebook or LinkedIn lately, or Reddit or Twitter, anywhere else, you have seen the explosion in growth of instructional designers wanting to learn more from one another. Maybe this is networking sessions or live events or in groups or whatever it is. All of us are trying to connect together, and that is amazing. Eventually, I had to make my own group as well, just to try to bring together all of these people, because I was just doing a whole bunch of connections of, hey, do you know this person? Or like, oh, hey, they're over here. And it's like, I need to be able to house all these people in one area. So for instructional designers, I made a Facebook group that you can go and find the link to that is over in the show notes as well, but it's simply just called Instructional Design Institute Community. But putting instructional designers aside a second, I have found that adult students are in the exact same position. They want to learn from their fellow peers. This could mean hearing a different perspective from another industry or receiving feedback from a person with the same amount of years of experience. By hosting weekly workshops and creating peer-reviewed assignments in my courses, they have completely changed the learning environment. The focus is not on me, but it's on us as a community. They know that other people in the class are in the same positions as themselves and working through the same problems. The power of togetherness is tremendous, and if we can harness this as a learning community, students will succeed more. And my final tip is to encourage asking for help. When students enroll in my courses, it means that they are trying to solve a problem through education. That should always be the focus. I want students to learn, and most importantly, to remember the information the next time they need to use it. I've taught courses before where I have to really drive this point home to make my students understand. They've been wired to think that grades are the most important thing, and they'll rush to get assignments done before the deadline. But what learning is taking place if the emphasis is on cramming and rushing? The emphasis should be on the experience. If someone needs more time to work on assignments, that is perfectly A-okay by me. The quality of submissions has drastically improved when I can shift the mindset around the stress of grades and deadlines and pivot to the goals of the assignments. However long it takes to achieve the goal is what we are going to roll with. Yes, there has to be some level of accountability. We can't give folks literally forever to work on an assignment, but by being understanding to the fact that adults have many other commitments, it goes such a long way. I care more about my students' mental health and well-being far more than I care if an assignment was submitted by midnight or not. During the height of the pandemic, I was constantly posting announcements that if my students needed to message me for more time because they were overwhelmed, that's perfectly fine. I was always willing to make a game plan with them to get them back on track. All I asked was to be kept in the loop and just communicate with me. That is all I needed to hear. I did not need any form of reasoning or any details. That's personal. I don't need to know. Just keep me in the loop. That's all I asked for. And once they were in a better headspace and they were ready to continue their journey, we would do it together. The world needs more compassion. And if we can do this as instructors and designers, we will all be in a much better place. I could write many more tips, but the blog and podcast needs to stop at some point, so I am going to conclude here for now. There might be a part 2. I could write a book on this, actually. I don't know what I'm going to do next. But you know what? For now, we're just going to stop at this point in time. And I know, folks, that was quite a long list of things. And maybe for some of you, you have not done any of these in the courses. Perhaps you're a teacher. Perhaps you are a designer. If you can just do one idea, just implement one thing into your online courses, that is a huge win in my book, and I would gladly give you a round of applause if you can pull that off. If you enjoyed these tips, by the way, and you want to read more about adult learning theories and andragogy, which is kind of like what this all centered around, basically, you can go over, once again, into the show notes for everything for the podcast, or just go over to the blog and find them. I hyperlinked everything there altogether as well. But the first thing I would recommend is New England Institute of Technology, actually not too far away from my home. They put together a very easy to read guide all about adult learning. I really like how they formatted that structure, so you can go and find that. If you want to take a real deep dive of going into andragogy and all these different types of learning theories, then you can certainly find books and websites and more, and a lot of YouTube videos as well, and interviews from really famous theorists as well, who basically gave us all of these concepts that I kind of talked about, from Dewey to Knowles to Mesereau and Kolb. You can find all of them online, but I'll put a few links into there for you too. Well, thank you for sticking around with me today on this solo podcast episode. If you have not yet signed up for the course on collaborating and building relationships with subject matter experts, I would highly encourage you to look into that. The feedback from all the students that have gone through the courses so far has been just absolutely awesome, and it's been a ton of fun for me to be the instructor and to do a lot of the things that I talked about today is done inside of that course. The wait list has finally opened up, and the launch of the next course is actually on May 4th. Yes, we did pick May the 4th be with you just to try to be able to captivate all the nerdiness of National Star Wars Day and all the learning nerd abilities that we talked about. We're just going to put them all into one day for starting the course. So May 4th, that is going to be happening. Go down to the show notes to see that link to sign up for it today. Of course, if you have any questions about that, please feel free. Reach out to me either by email or by LinkedIn or on our Facebook group, whatever works for you. Always happy to chat more about that. If you enjoyed the podcast, give it a 5-star rating wherever you are listening. I am not picky one bit if you listen on Apple or Spotify or Stitcher or whatever the other thing is. I have no idea. There's so many nowadays. If you leave those reviews anywhere online, I deeply appreciate that. Also, so many of you are leaving reviews for the book on Amazon, so thank you for that as well. What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer is the title of the book, so thank you for that. But folks, that's it. Yeah, that's literally all I have for you today. Thank you so much once again for being here. And I guess I'll say the final thing that I always say, which is the catchphrase, which is stay nerdy out there. Yeah, I'll talk to you next time.